Back again with Emma Vigeland, and I'm starting to like the Majority Report. And why do I say that, you ask? Well, it means I'm never short of material for this series. It's like a bottomless salt mine. Today, I'll be joining the lovely Emma Vigeland in a video titled How Joe Rogan Acts as a Gateway to Radicalisation. And in this video, she will be joined by one Nick Marks, who's an Associate Professor of Film and Media Studies at Colorado State University's College of Liberal Arts. So let's get right into it.
So for too long, we've categorized comedy very subjectively. We've used our own taste to say what is and is not comedy, but we don't do that with other art forms.
And that's not a good start. This is just not true. People quite frequently question if some exhibit or other in a gallery should be classed as art. Is a banana duct taped to a wall art? Is an upturned urinal art if you put a velvet rope around it? Right off the bat, he's saying things that are demonstrably not true. He continues.
One of the bigger points we try to make is the attractiveness of this art form for young male listeners and viewers. Overwhelmingly, the folks listening to Rogan, to Legion of Skanks, to other forms of right-wing comedy are these kind of politically neutral, still in formation, young male listeners.
Did you notice the implicit bias there? How he just casually drops in that Joe Rogan is right-wing comedy, with no description given of what right-wing comedy even is, or what would make Rogan this. It's just thrown in there as a given.
And so the danger is that this cultural form is used to recruit them to right-wing causes, to the Republican Party.
They seem to genuinely consider art that does not personally serve them politically to be dangerous. So it's a danger if the cultural form is used to recruit people to the right wing, but using it to recruit people to the left wing is just fine. This is just naked political partisanship, masquerading as good faith journalism and academia. This is a brazen display of it's okay when our side does it. So that is his thesis, that Joe Rogan is using comedy to recruit young men to the right wing. I imagine he must have some really strong evidence to make a claim like that.
I don't have hardcore sort of sociological statistics saying X number of folks are joining the Republican Party based on listening to these programs, but the
it's obvious. Yeah.
What can she mean? It's obvious. He's just got done saying he doesn't have statistics to back the idea that he's just forwarded. How is it obvious? If not backed by data and statistics, what are you going on other than your own prejudice and bias? There are a whole lot of assertions being made in this video on the basis of no evidence whatsoever. That quote, politically neutral, still in formation young male listeners, who are apparently conscripted to the right by listening to Rogan. The average age of Joe Rogan's listeners is apparently 24 years old. That doesn't sound like still in formation young male listeners to me. And this is Emma Vigeland's show, remember? She was arguing just a scant few weeks ago for transitioning 4-year-olds to another gender. So in her mind, apparently, 4-year-olds are grown up enough to make that call in her mind, but 24-year-old listeners of Joe Rogan's show's minds are still malleable and in formation. Make it make sense.
Right.
If you listen to Rogan and the Libertarian podcast, the ad spots, the ad reads he does are overwhelmingly for 22-year-old dudes, right? It's off-brand Viagra and Butcher Box and all these things that you buy if you've got a disposable income.
Are you kidding me? What can he mean? What is that supposed to prove? The ad reads in Joe Rogan shows are for people buying meat and off-brand Viagra. How does that demonstrate that any of the viewers are joining the Republican Party or being made far right? How do you arrive at off-brand Viagra for 22-year-olds? The thing that's meant to treat only typically kicks in when men are over 40 years old. That would suggest to me that quite a few of Rogan's listeners are 40 and above. And is that what it takes for someone to be right-wing now? Buying a box of meat? This guy is a professor, An academic being paid to teach young people, and I'm having to try very hard to not be personally insulting towards him here. I was not sure what I was expecting from an associate professor of film and media studies at Colorado State, but I was expecting more than this. I was expecting at bare minimum some sort of evidence to prove his assertions, or some sort of scientific rigour.
You mentioned Rogan there, right? That's somebody who you explore in your 4th chapter as we begin to go down this wormhole.
Down a wormhole? Does she mean down a rabbit hole? I do love a good mixed metaphor though. One of my favourites ever I saw on Sky News Australia, a journalist by the name of Petter Credlin, and she was trying to describe something that personally annoyed her, and she uttered the phrase, "You know what really gets under my goat?" You see, she mixed up, "You know what gets under my skin?" and "Do you know what gets my goat?" and it still makes me laugh. The idea of something getting under her presumably quite confused goat.
Yeah, so Rogan's a tricky figure because he's not got politics, he's got demographics. I think his first mission is to serve this very lucrative young male listening audience, 10 million, 11 million listeners per episode, to Spotify and to his advertisers. He's someone who's been on mic and doing stand-up and in the public eye long enough that he can plausibly affirm or deny any given political ideology. And he often does, right? He says, "Oh, I had Bernie Sanders on," but of course he flipped to Trump after Sanders dropped out.
Rogan also didn't, as far as I can discern, flip to Trump after Sanders dropped out. He publicly backed Sanders, but apparently voted for Joe Jorgensen. What he said was he would sooner vote for Trump than Biden, because he viewed Biden as mentally unfit for the office. But that's not the same thing as flipping to Trump now, is it? The good professor appears to be lying again.
The point with Rogan, though, is not necessarily to catch him as a right-wing ideologue according to what he says, but it's the connections he has to all these other figures, many of whom we cover in the book.
That's guilt by association, so now Rogan is right-wing apparently because of people he's talked to, or just people the professor has connected him to.
But all these other figures in the conservative political world, in the right-wing cultural universe, overwhelmingly picture him as somebody libertarian, as somebody right-wing sympathetic.
And that's mind-reading, so now Joe Rogan is right-wing, based on the intricate evidence of how some figures that the professor has also deemed to be right-wing picture Rogan in their heads when the professor sees their thoughts.
So the recommendations, for instance, that pop up when you listen to the Rogan experience regularly are podcasters like Legion of Skanks, whom we talk about, Michael Malice, who then connect you to other further right, further fascist adjacent kind of nefarious characters who exist in the basement of this complex that we talk about.
Even if Spotify gives recommendations from Rogan's show to other shows that you don't personally like, people you consider on the right wing, how is that Rogan's fault? Surely that would be on Spotify or whatever unspecified platform you're talking about. Nor do I trust this professor or Emma Vigeland to correctly discern who's even on the right wing, seeing as their determinations are built on prejudice from what I've seen so far. Prejudice, mind reading and guilt by association. Having a look at the guests Rogan's had on, it seems a pretty broad church to me. A lot I would not even describe as being overtly political. There's lots of professional fighters that Rogan presumably knows from his time on the UFC, lots of stand-up comics, scientists, experts in fields, notable or famous names. I dread to think where Emma Vigeland would put Brett Weinstein on a political spectrum. Just a guess, to her, he'd probably be Austrian painter adjacent. That is how out of sync with reality I think Emma Vigeland is at this point. To her, Jimmy Dore and Tulsi Gabbard are probably also far right. So yes, a person will think Joe Rogan has loads of right-wing guests on if they think almost everyone is right-wing.
How do you respond to the Rogan fans who say, well, look, he's had Bernie Sanders on, or he's had Cornel West on, or he's had some lefties on? I mean, to me, I don't listen to Rogan at all, really, except for the purposes of my job to disentangle some of his right-wing stuff. But it's clear to me that those are outliers. But I'm curious what your response is to that claim.
The first response is what you just said. The centrist to left personalities he has on are outliers compared to the dozens and even hundreds of Milo Yiannopoulos' and Jordan Peterson's and all these people who become associated in a bigger context with conservative political causes and with right-wing cultural issues. The second bigger point that I would make is look at the industry built up around him. Look at who he hangs out with. Look at the shows that he guests on and the people who go to guest on other shows. Who does he go on tour with? Who are the sort of people advertising on his show? Over and over again, it pushes in the rightward direction.
From the returning guests, I think Rogan's main goals are entertainment, information, and making people laugh. Jordan Peterson has been on his show 18 times. Milo Yiannopoulos has been on 7 times. Rogan's friend, the comic Joey Diaz, has been on 138 times. And that is a good demonstration of one of the numerous problems of using guilt by association, apart from it being extremely unjust. So if people in what you class as the left refuse to go on Rogan's show, and they will increasingly refuse if you demonise anyone that does, that will mean Rogan mostly has people on the right or centre on his show, and no doubt you consider centrists to be right-wing too. And therefore, Rogan must be right-wing in your view because he talks mostly to right-wingers, and anyone that talks to Rogan must also be right-wing because they're now going on a right-wing show. With the sheer willingness demonstrated here to cast people out and declare them right-wing, if they really were, you'd never win an election again. Because if you follow this thought through, Bernie Sanders went on Rogan. That means Bernie Sanders is now right-wing. The way you're going, you will literally purity test until the entire left wing is one very committed communist dude.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronoun?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Oh, whatever. Please yourself. At least it'll be funny to watch.
But for so long, especially in political comedy, we've used our taste to say, no, Jon Stewart is funny because I agree with him. Steven Crowder is not because he's just angry all the time, right?
Hang on. So Jon Stewart is funny because you agree with him? What has agreement got to do with comedy? But I have seen that on American late night talk shows, an audience that watches a person deliver a line and the audience doesn't laugh, they instead clap. And if comedy is agreement, that isn't even a working definition of comedy. In a world where that was true, you could go with a friend to a comedy show, have one of you agree with the comedian and the other not, and it would simultaneously make it both comedy and not comedy. Comedy is not dependent on subjective humour either, for the same reason. We should maybe stick to the dictionary definition of comedy as jokes and sketches intended to make an audience laugh. And who says comedy can't be angry? Did Professor Marx miss the entire career of Sam Kinison? Bill Hicks, George Carlin. Not only did Sam Kinison use anger in his sets, sometimes it was the whole set. Just try watching the set he did at Dangerfields. Not only is anger in comedy fine, it's a thing some of the best comedians have used to great effect, and I wouldn't even describe Steven Crowder as particularly angry. How about this though? Is this comedy? This video of Stephen Colbert playing in the background now, is this entertainment? What precisely is this from Stephen Colbert? What the hell happened to him? I remember getting laughs from the Colbert Report. Now his show's bleak. Comedy as a whole is bleak. It's like art has been strangled by political orthodoxy, with even productions like The Life of Brian now facing calls for censorship again. A film that in 1979 faced calls for censorship by the church is now facing calls for censorship from the political left.
Maybe it's time we set a little trap for Crystal Cove's knob stealer. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic...
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.